Hello class and welcome to our presentation, The Theravada Tradition. So in this presentation, we will learn about the early development of Buddhism, and then we will focus upon what is called the Theravada Buddhist tradition. So as we learned in our overview lecture, there are two major sects of Buddhism. The sect known as the Theravada tradition and the sect known as the Mahayana tradition. And sectarianism, or the splintering of a religious tradition into various sects, is a common phenomenon within religious traditions. Indeed, one of the main causes of sectarianism is disagreement among different factions regarding the teachings and practices of a religious movement. And normally, each sect proposes that their teachings and practices are the most authentic reflection of the vision of the religious founder. So both Theravada and Mahayana Buddhists are going to argue that their particular sect captures the essence of the Buddhist message, that their teachings are the most accurate and most consistent with the Buddhist teachings. And in the case of Buddhism, the Theravada and Mahayana traditions arose after the death of Buddha, when the Sangha or religious community fractured into many different sects. And Buddhism fractured because factions disagreed over three main things: the nature of Buddha, his teachings on the religious life, and his teachings regarding right meditation practices. Now, although early Buddhism fractured into several different sects after the death of Buddha, only the Theravada and Mahayana traditions survive, in addition to a third sect related to the Mahayana called the Vajrayana or diamond cutter tradition. And the Vajrayana tradition exists primarily in the regions surrounding the Himalayan mountains in places like Bhutan and Tibet. Now, Theravada and Mahayana Buddhists agree on most of the foundational principles of Buddhism, but as we mentioned earlier, they disagree on three main issues: the nature of Buddha, the nature of the religious life, and Buddhist meditation practices. So let's take a look at this chart to look at some of the basic differences between these two sects. So with respect to the nature of Buddha, the Theravada tradition argues that Buddha was an ordinary human being who just so happened to have extraordinary insight. But the Mahayana tradition argues that Buddha is a supernatural being who continues to intervene in human salvation. In terms of the religious life, the Theravada tradition believes that the path of the Arhat leads to salvation, whereas the Mahayana tradition believes that the path of the Bodhisattva leads to salvation. And whereas the Theravada tradition adhere to certain meditation practices like Samatha and Vipassana, Mahayana Buddhists tend to adopt what we might call emptiness and sudden enlightenment forms of meditation. Now, before we continue, here's a disclaimer. The Theravada and Mahayana traditions are extremely complex and varied within themselves. So we will analyze some of the general features of these two sects for the remainder of this presentation and the next presentation. So with that being said, let us begin our analysis of Theravada Buddhism, which literally means in Pali Sanskrit, the way of the elders. So Theravada Buddhism has become popular in regions such as India, Sri Lanka, and Southeast Asia. And Theravada Buddhists argue that the path of the Arhat, or the enlightened one, is the way of salvation. And in general, an Arhat refers to a monk or nun who concentrates upon his or her own attainment of enlightenment, nirvana, and parinirvana. So in other words, the Arhat does not go out seeking disciples, but rather if people come to the Arhat, then the Arhat may very well teach those people if they come to him or her, but they will actually not go out of their way to take on disciples and teach others. Thus, the Arhat adopts a strict, isolating, moderately ascetic lifestyle that mimics the life of the historical Buddha, because again, their primary focus is to achieve enlightenment, nirvana, and parinirvana in their own lifetime. So for example, arhats, like the historical Buddha, eat once a day, beg for their food in the cities and villages, they live alone in the wilderness or within a monastery or convent, and they basically spend every day studying the scriptures and meditating. And just as kind of like an FYI, Theravada monks and nuns tend to wear saffron robes, that is, robes that are like a burnt orange color. And this distinguishes them from monks of the Mahayana tradition who typically wear red robes. Now, what forms of meditation does the Arhat adopt? Because as we know from previous presentations, meditation is a central practice in the Buddhist tradition. Now, several meditation techniques exist within the Theravada tradition, but we will focus upon two of these techniques, Samatha Meditation and Vipassana Meditation. So what is Samatha Meditation? Well, Samatha Meditation is often referred to as calming meditation or calm mind meditation. And basically it begins by the practitioner focusing upon the inward and the outward movement of their breathing. And once they focus upon their breathing, they are to kind of enter into this natural state of intense concentration. And the result is that the mind becomes calm. And the goal of Samatha meditation, arguably, is to attain this calm, serene mind, because it's kind of like experiencing a glimpse of nirvana. Because remember, nirvana means peace. So by calming the mind through this breathing exercise, entering into this intense state of concentration, it calms the mind, and the monk or nun catches a glimpse of the feelings that one experiences when they encounter nirvana. So we have a basic understanding of Samatha meditation. So what is Vipassana? So Vipassana is often referred to as insight meditation. And when one practices Vipassana, they first begin with Samatha meditation. That is, they focus upon, again, the inward and the outward movement of their breath. And what inevitably happens is that certain thoughts, feelings, images, or sensations kind of arise in the mind. So the goal of Vipassana is to analyze those images, feelings, or sensations once they arise in the mind. And once one analyzes them, they will come to understand the impermanent nature of thoughts and feelings, images, etc. And the idea is that once you realize the impermanent nature of your thoughts and feelings and cravings and things like that, that you will become non-attached to them because they're impermanent, so there's no reason to grasp them. So let's go over a basic example of Vipassana meditation. So let's say that a Buddhist practitioner is meditating and the image of an apple comes into the mind. So what they are to do is they are to analyze the properties of the apple, like the color and the shape, etc. And then they may very well begin to unravel the apple, kind of beginning with the skin, moving to the pulp and the seeds, and again, just getting a basic understanding of the nature of an apple. And then they may even picture the apple's impermanence, like imagine a rotting apple or an apple core, something like that. So after all of that analysis, the Buddhist practitioner will acquire some insight into the nature of the mind and the world. So they will come to realize, for example, that an apple is impermanent, it has no essence, and therefore there's no reason to be attached to it. So in conclusion, when the Arhat dedicates his or her entire life to the daily practice of these forms of meditation, he or she will gradually let go of his or her destructive thoughts and feelings and attain a peaceful, serene mind. So we have some understanding as to the ways monks and nuns practice Theravada Buddhism, But how do lay people participate in this particular tradition? So lay Buddhists practice a series of precepts or practices which will lead to good karma, and they would be giving alms to monks and nuns, praying and meditating in temples and monasteries, as well as following the general kind of moral principles of Buddhism and adopting lives of moderation. So the purpose of these practices is not to achieve enlightenment, nirvana, and parinirvana in this lifetime, but rather it allows lay people to generate enough good karma so that maybe when they're reborn in the next lifetime, the mind will be ready to become a monk or nun. Now, interestingly, in Thailand, all 18-year-old men are required to take part in what is called the ordination. And in this ordination practice, they live in a monastery for a year and they learn Buddhist sacred texts and practices. And after the year has been completed, each man decides whether he'll become a monk or a householder. And if a man does choose the life of a householder, it's not uncommon that they will return to the monastery for religious retreats throughout the course of their lifetime to reconnect with their faith tradition.